Look around this room. Think about the people you work with, the people you share a home with, the people you pass on the street. Every single one of them is running a hidden script. They are projecting confidence, masking insecurity, faking certainty, and hiding a deep structural fatigue. Most people walk through life completely blind to this. They react to the mask. They fight the projection. They exhaust themselves playing a game where they don't even know the rules. But then there is a very specific group of people. If you are one of them, you already know it, even if you've spent your entire life wishing you weren't. You don't just see the room, you feel the room. You don't just hear the words, you absorb the unspoken microstress radiating off the person standing 3 feet away from you. For decades, the world told you this was a defect. The self-help industry told you that you were too sensitive. The corporate world told you that you lacked the thick skin required to compete. You were treated like a biological sponge, doomed to soak up everyone else's toxic waste until you broke. You were conditioned to believe you were weak. And that is the exact vulnerability your environment used to keep you small. But a shift has just occurred. The macro environment has changed, and the very architecture of human interaction has flipped. We have entered a hyper-digitized, hyper-isolated era where human connection has degraded into raw data. Trust is entirely bankrupt. Deception is a baseline strategy. And in this specific high-friction landscape, the standard corporate sociopath is suddenly firing completely blind. They can no longer read the room because the room is too complex. This means the old power dynamics are dead. The blunt force instruments of manipulation, intimidation, and raw ego don't work anymore. The world has run out of patience for noise, and it is starving for signal. Right now, as we sit in this room, the psychological landscape is clearing. The stage is being reset. The person who can sit quietly, bypass the mask, decode the underlying trauma of a room, and regulate the nervous systems of everyone in it is no longer a victim of the environment. They are the absolute authority in it. You are not broken, you were just early. And what you are about to witness over the next few months is not a gradual recovery. It is a calculated, inevitable, and devastatingly quiet takeover. The empath is about to enter the biggest comeback of their life. If you do not understand the tactical shift required to move from an absorber to a regulator, you will remain a casualty of someone else's unhealed script. But if you learn how to weaponize your sensitivity into sovereign compliance, you will never have to play defense again. Most people believe that power belongs to the person who makes the most noise. They think the person commanding the room is the one with the loudest voice, the sharpest elbows, or the most aggressive posture. They are wrong, dead wrong. The loudest person in the room is almost always the most predictable. They are reacting to an internal deficit, broadcasting their insecurities in a desperate attempt to control their environment. True operational dominance doesn't make noise. It doesn't need to. True dominance is silent. It is observational, and it is hyper-calibrated. If you have spent your life absorbing the emotional wreckage of the people around you, if you have been labeled an empath or a highly sensitive person, you have been led to believe that your nervous system is a liability. You've been told to build walls, to isolate, and to hide because you feel too much. I am here today to tell you to tear those walls down, not to let people in, but to let your awareness out. Over the next 45 minutes, I'm going to show you exactly why your sensitivity is not a flaw. It is the most advanced biological radar system on the planet. I'm going to reveal the specific psychological pivot that turns an emotional victim into an environmental regulator. If you leave this room early, you will continue to let toxic baselines dictate your energy, your wealth, and your peace of mind. But if you stay, and if you apply the exact operational shifts we are going to cover, you will watch the power dynamics in your life reverse completely within the next 90 days. The people who used to drain you will suddenly look to you for stability. The environments that used to overwhelm you will conform to your silence. Let's look at the baseline mechanics of human behavior. Every human being is a walking biocomputer constantly transmitting signals. Vocal tonality, pupil dilation, micro shifts in breathing patterns, and subtle changes in posture. The average person processes about 10% of this data consciously. The rest is completely lost on them. An empath, however, has an incredibly dense, highly active mirror neuron system. Your brain doesn't just register that someone is angry or anxious. It simulates that anger or anxiety within your own body. You are a biological decoder. For years, this has been your curse because you were never given the user manual. You walked into a room, picked up on the hidden hostility, assumed it was your fault, or allowed it to degrade your own emotional state. You became an absorber. When you absorb, you are submissive to the environment. You are letting the broken scripts of others rewrite your internal state. But look at what happens when we shift the lens. What happens when a sniper gets a high-powered scope? They don't complain that they can see too much detail. They use that data to calculate the exact adjustment needed to achieve their objective. Your sensitivity is that scope. We are currently living through the most psychologically fragmented period in modern history. Trust is a scarce commodity. People are hiding behind highly curated digital personas, yet their real-world behavior is becoming increasingly erratic, defensive, and desperate. In this environment, the traditional alpha archetype, the aggressive, ego-driven manipulator, is completely failing. Why? Because aggression triggers immediate resistance. In a low-trust world, when someone pushes hard, everyone else immediately pulls back. The old tools of manipulation are creating nothing but friction and rebellion. This is where your comeback begins. While the egoists are busy burning bridges and creating noise, the world is quietly searching for something else, an anchor. Human beings are biologically hardwired to seek out the most stable nervous system in their vicinity. It's an evolutionary survival mechanism. When a tribe is in chaos, they don't follow the most hysterical person. They follow the person whose heart rate remains steady. As an empath, you have an unfair advantage. You already know exactly what everyone in the room needs to feel safe, because you can feel their lack of safety. The moment you stop absorbing their fear and instead start projecting stability, you become the psychological gravity well of that room. Everyone else will unconsciously begin to match your baseline. How do we execute this shift logistically? It requires 3 specific behavioral adjustments. First, you must establish neurological sovereignty. The next time you walk into a high-stress environment or confront an aggressive individual, and your body begins to feel that familiar tightening in the chest, you must instantly label it. You look at that feeling and say to yourself, "That does not belong to me. That is data, not an identity." The moment you separate the data from your identity, you stop absorbing. You become a detached observer watching a simulation. Second, you utilize the vulnerability loop. Most people are terrified of being seen. They wear masks of competence and anger to hide their flaws. An empath doesn't fight the mask. They acknowledge the reality behind it. When you speak to someone who is acting out of ego, you don't respond to their aggression. You look them directly in the eye, you lower your vocal tone, you slow your cadence, and you speak directly to their hidden anxiety. You say the thing they are desperate for someone to understand, but too terrified to admit. When you do this, their psychological defenses collapse instantly. You haven't manipulated them, you have decoded them. Third, you practice environmental regulation. Instead of matching the chaotic energy of your environment, you become a thermostat, not a thermometer. A thermometer merely records the temperature. A thermostat changes it. You maintain absolute stillness in your posture. You keep your breathing deep and rhythmic. You speak only after a deliberate 2-second pause. By maintaining absolute control over your own behavioral baseline, you force the chaotic elements around you to either calibrate to your calmness or leave your space entirely. The era of the loud, dominant, unfeeling manipulator is drawing to a close. Their systems are overheating, and their strategies are producing nothing but burnout and isolation. The stage is now set for a different kind of power. A power that doesn't need to shout, threaten, or play games. A power that stems from absolute human awareness, profound self-regulation, and the ability to see right through the illusions people build around themselves. Your entire life has been a training ground for this exact moment. Every ounce of pain you felt from absorbing the chaos of the world was simply the cost of calibrating your instruments. The calibration is complete. The training phase is over. It is time to stop apologizing for your sensitivity. It is time to stop hiding from the noise. Step back into the arena, not as a sponge to be wrung out, but as the quiet, sovereign authority the world has been waiting for. The comeback hasn't just begun. You have already entered it. Now sit still, look them in the eyes, and let them adjust to you. The weaponization of empathy represents a total paradigm shift in how we understand human influence, moving it away from the soft, passive domain of emotional vulnerability and redefining it as a highly sophisticated system of situational dominance. For generations, the cultural narrative surrounding the empath has been deeply flawed, framing the trait as a psychological fragility that leaves an individual at the mercy of their surroundings. You have been told that your capacity to feel the unexpressed tension in a room or to subconsciously decode the hidden anxiety of a colleague is a cross to bear. This mischaracterization is not accidental. It is a direct result of an outdated social framework that only recognizes power when it is loud, overt, and aggressive. But in the theater of human behavior, blunt force is an inefficient strategy. The individual who relies on intimidation or raw ego is broadcasting their moves long before they make them, creating friction, triggering defense mechanisms, and forcing everyone around them into a state of active resistance. True operational control does not announce itself. It operates beneath the threshold of conscious awareness, utilizing advanced biological radar to read, process, and leverage the hidden variables of human interaction. This is where the weaponization of empathy becomes lethal. When you stop viewing your high sensitivity as an emotional liability and begin treating it as an objective data-gathering apparatus, you change the entire physics of the room. Your mirror neuron system is not a flaw. It is a hyper-calibrated biological decryption tool. It allows you to intercept the microsignals that others are constantly transmitting. The slight tightening of the jaw, the subtle shift in breathing patterns, the fleeting micro-expressions of insecurity that even the most practiced sociopath cannot entirely suppress. Most people walk through life completely blind to this data stream, reacting only to the masks that people wear. A weaponized empath sees through the mask instantly, identifying the precise psychological baseline of every individual in their environment. By converting raw emotional absorption into detached behavioral intelligence, you effectively strip the people around you of their ability to manipulate or deceive. You are no longer reacting to their projections. You are observing their internal mechanics in real time. This degree of situational awareness grants you an unprecedented level of behavioral leverage. When you know exactly what an individual is feeling, you know exactly what they are missing, what they fear, and what they are desperately trying to protect. You can predict their reactions before they even formulate them consciously. This transforms empathy from a passive state of suffering into an active tool of strategic calibration. You can deliberately alter your vocal tonality, adjust your physical pacing, and tailor your language to speak directly to their unstated needs or hidden vulnerabilities. You are no longer a victim of the emotional weather in the room. You become the entity that dictates the climate. The weaponized empath doesn't seek to dominate through noise or conflict. They dominate through absolute, unshakable clarity, utilizing their profound understanding of human nature to quietly guide outcomes, dissolve resistance, and command authority without ever dropping a single hint of aggression or malice. The vulnerability loop trait relies on an entirely different layer of human biology, specifically the mirror neuron system, which functions as a subconscious, real-time bridge between human nervous systems. When two people enter the same physical or psychological space, their brains immediately begin an unprompted, high-speed dialogue of calibration. The average person experiences this as a vague intuition or a gut feeling about someone. But an empath possesses a vastly more active and dense neural architecture dedicated to this exact process. Your brain does not merely note that someone is projecting an aura of confidence or masking an intense pocket of stress. It replicates that exact physiological state inside your own body. This is the underlying mechanics of how you read a baseline. A baseline is not just a static set of behaviors. It is the unique emotional and psychological frequency an individual returns to when they feel safe, or conversely, when they are actively running a defensive script. Most individuals spend an immense amount of energy constructing a flawless external facade designed to project authority, competence, or indifference. They practice their handshakes, calibrate their eye contact, and choose their words with meticulous care. However, they cannot control the autonomous nervous system, which continuously leaks raw data through microexpressions, pupillary responses, and minute shifts in physical gravity. Because your neural architecture is hyper-attuned to these anomalies, you bypass the constructed facade entirely. You anchor yourself not to what they want you to see, but to the precise biological reality of what they are experiencing in that exact second. This creates a highly asymmetric power dynamic. While the other person is interacting with your physical presentation, you are interacting directly with their unvarnished psychological core. The moment you anchor their baseline, you gain the ability to initiate the vulnerability loop without uttering a single syllable. Human beings are evolutionary pack animals, and our survival has always depended on our ability to sync our internal states with the most stable entity in our immediate vicinity. If an individual is running a high-stress, deceptive, or aggressive script, their nervous system is inherently volatile and hypervocal. When they encounter an empath who refuses to match that volatility, someone who remains entirely still, whose breathing remains deeply regulated, and whose gaze is completely devoid of judgment or reaction, a profound psychological friction occurs. Their nervous system instinctively recognizes that their current script is failing to provoke the expected reaction. This failure triggers a subconscious state of confusion, forcing their defenses to momentarily drop in a desperate search for behavioral feedback. This is the opening of the loop. By maintaining absolute neutrality and projecting a pristine, unshakable internal baseline, you create a psychological vacuum. Because human nature abhors a vacuum, the other person's subconscious will naturally and irresistibly begin to conform to your energy in an effort to close the gap and find safety. They will begin to slow their speech, drop their defensive posturing, and unconsciously mirror your physical stillness. You have effectively used their own hidden vulnerability to rewrite their behavior from the inside out. You haven't engaged in a debate, you haven't used intimidation, and you haven't played a transparent game of manipulation. You have simply allowed your hyper-calibrated nervous system to act as a behavioral anchor, quietly forcing their volatile script to dissolve and bend to the quiet authority of your own regulated state. The sovereign boundary matrix is the structural framework that separates the old, exhausted version of the empath from the newly evolved, strategically dominant archetype. For decades, the primary failure point for highly sensitive individuals has been the absence of an operational filter. Without a system to categorize incoming data, an empath functions as a chaotic sponge, indiscriminately soaking up the psychological waste, unspoken hostility, and ambient anxiety of every environment they step into. This leads to chronic emotional fatigue, sensory overwhelm, and an inevitable retreat from the world. The sovereign boundary matrix corrects this design flaw by shifting your operational position from a passive absorber to an active, conscious regulator of human dynamics. This matrix is not a thick wall built out of fear or isolation. Walls are rigid defensive structures that cut you off from the very data stream you need to maintain situational awareness. Instead, the matrix is a highly sophisticated, semi-permeable psychological filter that allows you to perceive everything while internalizing nothing. To implement this matrix, you must fundamentally change your relationship with the emotional energy of others. When you walk into a high-friction meeting or a tense interpersonal conflict, and your body begins to register the sharp spike of someone else's anger or panic, the old habit is to let that sensation flood your own nervous system, treating it as if it were your own. The sovereign boundary matrix demands an immediate clinical reclassification of that input. The moment the sensation hits your field of awareness, you mentally label it not as an emotion, but as raw behavioral data. You look at the radiating tension from the person across from you, and you internally state, that is their unhealed script leaking out. It is an external metric, not an internal reality. This simple act of cognitive reframing instantly detaches your identity from the phenomenon. You are no longer drowning in their emotional storm. You are a meteorologist standing safely behind a pane of reinforced glass, mapping the trajectory of the wind. Once this sovereign boundary is established, your presence ceases to be a target for other people's projection, and instead becomes a stabilizing force that actively dictates the emotional climate. Human environments naturally default to chaos when there is no clear, regulated center of gravity. Most people are thermometers. They merely register and reflect the temperature of whatever room they are in, escalating tension when things get hot and freezing up when things get cold. When you deploy the sovereign boundary matrix, you become the thermostat. Because your internal baseline is locked behind an impenetrable boundary of self-regulation, you do not catch the emotional virus being passed around the room. You remain entirely still. Your breathing stays slow and deliberate, and your facial expressions remain completely neutral. This creates a massive psychological counterweight. The individuals who are driving the chaos will suddenly find that their outbursts, their passive-aggressive jabs, or their manipulative tantrums are achieving absolutely zero traction against your composure. They are throwing emotional punches into a void. As a result, the chaotic energy of the environment has no choice but to burn itself out against your silence, forcing every volatile element in the room to gradually, unconsciously decelerate and conform to the unshakable, sovereign boundary you have established. The evolutionary turning point we are currently living through represents a massive macro-level realignment that has quietly flipped the entire global power dynamic in favor of the hyper-perceptive individual. For the last several decades, the world was engineered for the loud, the blunt, and the surface-level manipulator. Society operated on relatively predictable, high-trust baselines where traditional, aggressive corporate tactics could yield consistent results. In that outdated ecosystem, human interaction was slower, simpler, and far less fragmented, allowing individuals with low empathy and high ego to bulldoze their way through rooms using sheer volume, posturing, and transparent manipulation tactics. But that world is entirely dead. The rapid acceleration of a hyper-digitized, hyper-isolated culture has radically altered the architecture of the human psyche. We have transitioned into an era defined by a profound, systemic bankruptcy of trust. People are bombarded with thousands of curated personas, deceptive marketing scripts, and digital fabrications every single day, which has forced the collective human nervous system into a state of chronic, hyper-vigilant defense. Because everyone is now walking around with their guard permanently up, the old-school, blunt force methods of influence no longer work. They immediately trigger a subconscious alarm, causing people to shut down, withdraw, or aggressively push back. In this highly volatile, low-trust landscape, the standard corporate sociopath is suddenly firing completely blind. They are accustomed to reading a world that no longer exists, and because they lack the sensory apparatus to decode complex, nuanced emotional undercurrents, they cannot understand why their usual power plays are producing nothing but friction, resentment, and operational paralysis. This macro-environmental shift has created an unprecedented, massive evolutionary demand for hyper-calibrated, high-integrity human decoders. The world has run out of patience for noise, and it is actively starving for signal. This is precisely where the empath's evolutionary turning point takes place, transforming what was once mocked as a social handicap into the single most valuable asset in modern human dynamics. While the average person is completely overwhelmed by the digital static and the psychological exhaustion of modern life, the evolved empath is uniquely equipped to navigate this complexity. Your hyperactive mirror neuron system allows you to effortlessly cut through the digital noise, the artificial corporate scripts, and the defensive posturing of the people around you. You don't need someone to give you a transparent speech about how they feel. You can read the truth in the exact fraction of a second their vocal pitch alters, the precise moment their breathing becomes shallow, or the subtle way they shift their physical weight when a sensitive topic is broached. In a landscape where everyone is desperately hiding behind a mask, the person who can see through the mask without making an enemy of the wearer holds absolute strategic leverage. You are the only one in the environment who truly knows what is happening beneath the surface. As organizations, families, and communities continue to fracture under the weight of unexpressed stress and hidden agendas, they will naturally, inevitably, gravitate toward the individual who possesses the rare biological capability to see the unspoken truth and restore equilibrium to the chaos. The power reversion principle is the definitive operational pivot where an empath officially ceases to play defense against a hostile world and instead begins to deploy their hyperacute neurological feedback loops to quiet chaos and command absolute environmental authority. For the majority of your life, you have likely operated under a defensive paradigm, assuming that your primary tactical objective when entering a high-stress room was to minimize the damage to your own psyche. You spent an immense amount of cognitive bandwidth trying to predict where the next emotional blow would come from, how to shield yourself from a toxic manager, or how to survive a highly dysfunctional family gathering. This defensive posture is an incredibly inefficient use of your neurological architecture, because it keeps your own nervous system locked in a state of hypervigilant survival, preventing you from utilizing the full strategic capacity of your sensory radar. The power reversion principle demands a total psychological mutiny against this submissive mindset. It forces you to realize that you are not a fragile, passive recipient of the room's energy. You are the most advanced, highly calibrated piece of biological technology in that space. And it is time to start acting like the operator. When you execute this principle, you completely flip the direction of the emotional current. In any given human interaction, the individual with the highest degree of internal certainty and the most stable, unshakable nervous system will inevitably dictate the behavioral baseline of the group. Most toxic individuals, the narcissists, the bullies, the manipulative egoists, appear powerful only because they are highly skilled at projecting their internal chaos outward, forcing everyone else to react to their volatile frequency. They rely entirely on your reactive energy to feed their script. The moment you step into a room utilizing the power reversion principle, you refuse to grant them that reaction. You anchor yourself in absolute physical and psychological stillness. You look directly past their aggressive posturing, their passive-aggressive barbs, or their transparent power plays, and you view those behaviors not as threats, but as weak, desperate distress signals from a profoundly dysregulated nervous system. By refusing to match their frequency, you instantly strip them of their momentum. They are expecting a counterpunch or a submissive retreat. Instead, they hit a brick wall of absolute, unreadable silence. This silence creates an intense psychological pressure. Because your mirror neurons allow you to feel the precise nature of their instability, you can strategically use your own physiological regulation to quiet their chaos. You lower your vocal register, slow your speaking cadence to a deliberate pace, and utilize tactical pauses before answering their demands. Because the human brain is biologically programmed to seek out the most stable baseline for its own survival, their nervous system will unconsciously, irresistibly, begin to drop its defenses and calibrate to your stillness. You are no longer absorbing their toxic waste, you are actively rewriting their behavioral chemistry from the inside out, using the sheer gravity of your composure. This is the ultimate realization of the empath's true nature. You were never meant to be a victim of human environments. Your hypersensitivity was given to you so that you could accurately diagnose the hidden fractures, the unhealed traumas, and the structural weaknesses of the people around you, giving you the exact data required to quietly step in, take control of the frequency, and command the space.